Welcome to the Digital Amateur Television Experimenters Night. This is VK7 OTC, the club station of the Radio and Electronics Association of Southern Tasmania. Amateur radio is a worldwide hobby that has many different aspects. Digital television is just one of the many modes and areas that are covered. Maybe you're interested in becoming involved in the DATV Experimenters Nights. Realise that you do not have to be a radio amateur or need any ATV equipment to participate anywhere in the world. Also participate in the night by coming up to the Queen's Domain club rooms. Yes, right on top of the Queen's Domain in the heritage-listed Coast Wireless Station. You never know, we might get you in front of the camera or behind doing one of the many roles during the night. We get underway with our program on a Wednesday night from 7:30 p.m. local time. We'll see you soon. This is VK7 OTC.
Okay, this is VK7 OTC, the club station of the Radio and Electronics Association of Southern Tasmania with our DATV Experimenters Night. And Justin, VK7 Tango Whiskey at the microphone tonight. And our show primarily consists of a few little bits at the beginning, and then we'll move to the tome, which is the Wireless Institute of Australia's response to the ACMA and the class license. Now, we're only covering the class license tonight. We're not covering the higher power. We'll do that next week because that deserves its own whole program. But we're covering the class license response. So before we get up into that, one thing I thought I would show you. I'm just about to start a project over the Christmas break which involves a Raspberry Pi. The Raspberry Pi that I'm actually using, there we are on the screen, the 4 gigabytes gives it away. It's a Raspberry Pi 4B 4 gig. But the thing that I wanted to show you was this is a power over Ethernet adapter, or a power over Ethernet or PoE hat. You can see it plugs into the 40 pin here. There's a little header that sits behind the Ethernet connector just here that it also plugs into. So what this enables you to do is you can feed power down the Ethernet cable, and it's usually nominally about 48 volts, gets fed down the Ethernet cable. And this converts that 48 volts, it takes it into this board. This is a little DC to DC converter which converts to the 5 volts at 3 amps that the Raspberry Pi needs. They also mount a little fan here for the processor and everything, which is really good because you don't actually have that much room to put a heat sink in here. But this particular Raspberry Pi also has a 180 degree fisheye camera, high resolution camera that I'm putting up on the roof to give me some time lapse of what's going on in the sky. So anyway, I just thought I'd show you the power over Ethernet hat for Raspberry Pi. Now, at the other end of the the other end of the Ethernet cable, you of course need to feed in some power. And this is a little power supply that enables you to feed that power up the Ethernet cable. You just have an in and out Ethernet cable, and it has a power supply built in, a little switch mode power supply built in, and it feeds the 48 volts up the cable. So all you need to do is when you put it up on the in this case I'll have this up in the ceiling. I'm just feeding the camera with an Ethernet cable. So very handy, very handy little device. Now the other thing to remind you of, and it is tonight, the annual Geminid meteor storm is the peak of it will be happening tonight around about 1 AM. So if perchance the cloud clears, which is probably highly unlikely, but if perchance the cloud clears, we may actually be able to see a peak of Geminid activity. But who knows? Who knows these days? But anyway, so yeah, that's something to remind you of. About 1 AM is the peak they're predicting is the peak, 1 AM tonight. So if the clouds miraculously clear and you're up at 1 AM, take a look outside and you might be able to see some meteor activity. Now, I'm also checking the chat channel on the streaming, so please let us know where you're coming in from, and if you've got any questions along the way, please feed them into the chat and I'll try and grab them and answer them at the time. So what we've got today is the Wallace Institute response to the ACMA consultation on the proposed class license and also the high power operation, which we'll do next week. Now, the class license, this particular response was put together by the WIA Spectrum Strategy Committee, of which I'm a member of the Spectrum Strategy Committee. And there's a whole bunch of much more highly educated and highly experienced people on the Spectrum Strategy Committee. I'm there more from the drafting point of view, but also I have an interest in the relationship with the ACMA. So, but this group put together this particular response over about a month and a half, I think was it. It included a survey that went out to members and also non-members, and we certainly used that material in getting this particular response that we're going to go through together. I think we had 615 responses to the survey, lots and lots of not just the standard responses, but also lots and lots of comments which we went through, we read through, we consolidated and then incorporated what we needed to into the response. So, without further ado, this is now, how do I, that's a good point. Okay. So I'm going to go through each of the recommendations and just give you where it's relevant a few little ideas of and a few little things that sat behind how we ended up with that particular recommendation. Now I'll just say up front actually here. The ACMA may take one look at this and go, well, we don't really want to do any of that, but it is a very highly considered response. It is what I think is a technically coherent response. There are a number of things where I think they've put something on the table and they may or may not want a reaction to that particular thing, or there are a few things that they've just got technically wrong, which I think are legal drafting things and all sorts of stuff. But so it is a considered response. It is coming from the WIA as representing WIA members, and we had 615 amateurs actually respond to the survey instead of 615 people, amateurs sending in responses to the ACMA, which they would then have to go through. and they've made it very clear that they want a consolidated response. They don't want lots and lots of responses. So that's what we've given them. So the very first one is we are the first thing I have to say here actually is there is now cautious agreement to a class license. When we went out before, the WIA went out before, we actually advised our members to not agree to the class license in its current form, in what was presented. And that was because there were a whole lot of issues with it that we had to resolve prior to going any further. So we are now cautiously recommending that we agree to the class license. And there are a few things that we're still concerned about, which we rose in the consultation paper, but we are cautiously agreeing to the fact that the ACMA has listened. They have put a whole lot of our concerns into the draft that they presented, and so they are certainly coming to the party and meeting and and making sure that both parties can work with it. They can work with it. It eases their administrative burden, and also it addresses the concerns that were put forward in the responses. So, without further ado, one of the first things that we're a bit concerned about is with a class license, basically we disappear out of the Register of Radio Communication License database, the RADCOM database. And so one of the concerns that we really do need addressed in some way, shape or form, and there's a bit more on this in a few slides' time, is the first recommendation is around that the ACMA shall require a database to be published. Now, all we're looking for in that database is allocated amateur call signs, level of qualification, so what sort of AOCP is it with that call sign, and then the last renewal date of the call sign. And I'll go into that last point in a couple of slides' time, because with a move to a class license, it's going to be a lot longer potentially than just a single year each time. You are more than likely going to be paying a fee that will last probably 5 or 10 years. So there is quite a bit of thinking that had to go around. If you've got something that lasts 5 to 10 years, how do you check that that license is actually still in use, the person hasn't died, the person, etc., etc. There's a whole lot of conditions. So, and also, the argument that we're putting here is around self-regulation. We go to the amateur, to the RADCOM database to actually self-regulate, to make sure that those people who are actually transmitting on those frequencies actually their license covers the frequencies they're transmitting on, etc., etc. As well as there is quite a lot of feedback that we've had from external law enforcement organisations who actually use the RADCOM database as well for a whole range of things, and I'll go into some of them in the not too distant future. So the other thing is to fix a bit of a problem that we've got, and this problem is around the call book or a call book like database. The database of allocated amateur call signs to be able to be republished, and what we're recommending there is they go out as under a Creative Commons by attribution license, very similar to what the ACMA documentation goes out under. So that we can, it resolves the issue around publishing into a call book like device. Now, the other issue that we've got is in moving to a class license, one of the concerns that we've actually got is those people who have operated overseas have to prove that they are bona fide amateur radio operators and they are able to operate within a particular country. Now, there is documentation that you actually need there that number one says a statement of certification a declaration of the call sign held by the individual, a declaration of their right to access the amateur radio licence provisions, and any relevant international, so the CEPT and HAREC reciprocal licensing arrangements, and any other class licence requirements. So when the New Zealand, so the NZART went to a class licence, they issued, and in fact included in the back of this this particular document, consultation document, there was an example given of the New Zealand class licence, that the actual form that the New Zealanders use, and it just let me check that. Okay, no, that's nothing to do with me. There was a form issued which had all of that detail on it, and when they went to a class license, every licensed amateur got one of those sheets of paper, and you can also organise to download that particular document to prove to those overseas organisations that you're actually able to do that. The problem with a class license is if you go to that, some of that documentation disappears. So that was one of our concerns. Now, an amateur, Australian amateur licence holding grandfathered qualifications. This is one thing that's actually missing. Those people who were grandfathered into particular licences over time, and you'll notice that there is a list of particular combinations of licences that ended up becoming standard, ended up becoming advanced, etc. These are all missed out of any draft class license, and we actually think there is a concern for those people who were grandfathered in about that. So to ensure no confusion arises regarding grandfathered qualifications, qualified holders being authorised to access the new class license. So this is just to remove any confusion. So that's a little bit of a pickup that the Spectrum Strategy Committee made in the draft of the class licence. Now, Australian amateur licence based on overseas qualifications. So there was a change made on the 19th of September around this, and there is some concern that those licence changes in ACMA policy be provided with suitable written certification of their rights to hold an Australian amateur call sign, because in moving to a class licence, we actually understand these people actually drop through the cracks. The recommendation is that they provide written evidence for those people. Now, we're only talking about a small cohort here, so we're not talking about too many here. So this is just an area where we think the way that the class license has been drafted, there may be an issue. Now, the other one is organisations and clubs holding amateur radio call signs. The class license is not actually that clear, and in fact open to a lot of interpretation. So what the recommendation here is, ensure suitable frameworks are put in place to manage call signs and their use when they are allocated to entities, not people, who are not natural persons. So what we are suggesting here and recommending is organisations must be an incorporated body or registered company. So from a legal perspective, there is something that you can link to that entity. The charter of the organisation must include the intent to engage in matters relating to amateur radio service. So not everybody can just put in for a call sign, for a club call sign. And the call sign issued entity shall maintain a record of the name and contact details of the responsible officers of that club or organisation. And in most cases, if that's a incorporated body, it would be the public officer details. And there'd be a suitable certificate provided that links the call sign to the class licence, etc., etc. So that's another thing that we picked up around class licences. So, and hello to Ron Mann. watching on ATV and this one, so fantastic. And VK3IK, evening. And yeah, just shout out to those people who are on, because there's a few people on right at the moment. Oh, pardon. Just let me have a drink. So shout out to those people. Let us know where you're coming in from, and if you've got any questions, then please shoot them into the chat. And Kevin Oz, hello. So EME regulatory arrangements. So the WIA asked the ACMA to update references to measurement methodologies in alignment with the ARPANSA standard. Now, we are moving away from the old standard to the new ARPANSA RPSS1 standard, and which we think is a good thing, which we actually really support. But there are some references to measurement methodologies, etc., in the class license, which is not in alignment with the ARPANSA standard. So that's a drafting thing. Now, low risk stations amendment. Now, this is low risk under 100 watts. The WIA recommends and seeks recognition by the ACMA of additional low risk transmitter scenarios and the addition of suitable criteria to enable them to be included under the schedule in the class license. So the recommendation is presumptions about compliance with the conditions in subclause 2.1, which is about low risk stations, be amended to include an additional criteria defining low risk stations as the following. So, if the antenna and the immediate environment are visible at all times while the operator is activating the transmitter end, the transmitter power output is no greater than 100 watts, which is the original low risk stations, and the operator as an aware user shall cease transmission should any member of the general public approach the station antenna within a distance of 5 metres. So this really defines even better the ability to operate a low risk station, and that's what we're recommending be included in the definition of a low risk station. So and this also goes to some of the higher power recommendations that I'll be talking about next week. So writing style. Now, this is probably the recommendation, the second paragraph there, to avoid misunderstandings. A preferred solution is the inclusion of a regulatory explanatory statement as an appendix. Such a statement could be framed in a way that enhances understanding by the target technical rather than legal audience. If you have had a look at the draft class license, and hello Paul Pruss and Phil Groom, BK7ID, hello. And if you have had a look at the draft class license that was put out by the ACMA, and you've gone to the schedule, the EMR part of the schedule, and sat down and tried to work out what they are saying, I wish you a lot of luck, because we had a lot of people in the committee who know a lot more about EMR and such things, and read a lot of legislation, and they all looked at it and went, what the hell are they trying to say here? So from that perspective, all we're asking for is plain English, the target technical rather than a legal audience, and also bearing in mind that there are people in the amateur communities who has English as a second language, and just to try and clarify and make it easier to understand. Ensure call sign assignment is mandatory. In reading the class license, we came to the conclusion, the draft class license, that there are some scenarios where an AOCP could be accepted and without an actual call sign. And so one of the things that we are suggesting is to change the call sign entity, and I think the original wording in the draft class license was may assign a call sign to a person. We actually are suggesting that should be shall. So everyone, every amateur is actually, every amateur and club station, etc., is issued a call sign because it is a call sign that is actually linked back to the person and the license. So that's just a minor change. Arrangements for organisations holding amateur licences. So this is Incorporated Amateur Radio Club and other registered bodies. Again, this is the shall assign a call sign to these registered bodies. So that's just a word change. A little bit around unattended transmitter control. Management of unattended transmitters should be retained to maintain the existing utility of the amateur service spectrum. This was actually removed out of the class license, so there is no requirement to manage or have the ability to manage an unattended transmitter. So this is watchdog timers or the ability to remotely access it and switch it off or the like. So we're actually suggesting that this clause be reintroduced, and this one's straight out of the LCD. Restrictions on connection to telephone, the public telecommunications network. Interconnection of amateur service transmitters to public telecommunications network must not result in unlicensed persons being able to initiate a transmission on the amateur radio spectrum. So, and we're actually, this has been removed, and we're just a little bit concerned that the removal of it potentially would enable unlicensed people to gain access to equipment and be able to transmit on amateur frequencies, which is not a good thing. So we're actually asking for that to be reintroduced. Addressing the problem of series of transmissions. Now this is interesting. Revise Part 3 Section 12 to restore the previous call sign usage pattern rules, which better reflect actual on-air practice and restore alignment with the current amateur apparatus license. So this is a series of transmissions. If there's a series of transmissions, it's the 10-minute rule, at least every 10 minutes during that transmission event, etc. So we're actually asking for this to be reintroduced to clarify requirements. Call sign usage in an emergency or emergency training exercise. This actually be restored in the class license. This was taken out. So this is the use of call signs where there is a group of stations. So if there's a group of stations, you actually can use a group call sign, if you like, an identifying group call sign. Same call sign parameters and use of call signs. It's just if there is a group that is actually involved, you can actually use that the designator as the call sign. So just asking for that to be put into and restored into the class license from the LCD. This is a drafting error. A person must not operate an amateur station on a frequency within the 3.4 to 3.6 gigahertz frequency band. So they left out 3.6 gigahertz. They only left in 3.4. So I know we're losing a fair bit of this, but we're actually in that band. So that's purely a drafting omission. Now. There is not a definition of mean power, which is PY. Now what we're actually suggesting is they include the definition from the ITU radio regulations, Article 1156 and 1158, which defines what peak, mean and carrier power actually is, and specifically the one that they're including in the class license is the mean power, the PY definition. So what we're suggesting is, in the interpretation section, they actually include the PY definition, which is exactly the same as what's in the ITU radio regulations. just so that it clarifies, because there is some confusion in the class license as to what it means. Definition of recognised overseas qualification. Okay, so the recognised, so there seeks some clarity here on what the definition of a recognised overseas qualification is, because it is not clear in the draft class licence. In the interpretation section, what we're suggesting is a recognised overseas qualifications means any of the following, which is basically our AOCP levels, as per the reciprocal agreement table as published from time to time on the on the ACMA website. And if you go there, there is a huge big long list of those that we have reciprocal agreements with and have also been assessed as being equivalent to one of those AOCP types. And now, renewal management of call signs. Now, this is all about that the issue with call signs is if call signs are removed from the RADCOM database, and there is no there needs to be a management framework, if you like, put around the management of call signs. And so what the ACMA, what the WIA is recommending to the ACMA is some principles, if you like, or the what we're calling fundamental characteristics of a call sign renewal system or capability that the call sign entity can actually fulfill. So the call sign entity in this particular case is whoever is contracted by the ACMA. Whoever is contacted by the ACMA to whoever is contracted by the ACMA to provide the call sign functionality, which in the current case is the AMC. So the call sign entity, that could be anybody who the ACMA contracts, but we're recommending that it be self-service, it be online based, and low cost, of course, centrally managed. Use data acquisition model where revalidation is an obligation on the call sign holder. So basically the call sign holder looks after their information. Fantastic. So a lot like some of the online systems that are available now. A renewal can occur at any time, but no less frequently than every 10 years, very similar to passports, so aligned to passports. And if a call sign is not renewed after 10 years, a grace period of a further 2 years is allowed, where the call sign is placed into a dormant state, which is what happens with silent key call signs now, and before it's released back into the pool for reallocation. So this goes to setting up a call sign management system that would be managed by the call sign entity. Now, some rules around the number of call signs able to be held, because one of the concerns we've got is as soon as we release this and go to a class license, there will suddenly be a black market of call signs, and there is some indication that this is occurring already, where we don't have any restrictions. So the recommendation around this is that individuals are permitted to hold a maximum of 2 permanent and 2 temporary call signs at any one time, and up to 10 for organisations or groups. And there are some special circumstances that we need to take into account here, which is the Scouts and Guides and also WISN have blocks of call signs that are allocated to them, so that would be an exception for them. And call signs held before the transition from an apparatus to class license be grandfathered and transferred into the new arrangements. Now, these limits are exactly the same as New Zealand, so that's actually where we took our model from. So the NZART looks after and there are restrictions on the number of call signs to be used, that can be used. Now, call sign transfer policy. We want to be able to preserve in the transition, but only if limits are placed onto the number of call signs held. In the previous slide, this presents the grey market forming. The WIA recommends that the call sign transfer as proposed by the ACMA be amended in alignment with what the WIA suggests above. So, and the call sign system. Call sign template policy management. This be a policy document which is the ACMA's holds and is responsible for with input from the amateur radio community. Very similar process we're suggesting and recommending, like the ACMA's technical liaison group arrangements. So there is a group of specialists, there are a group of interested individuals who get together with the ACMA and comes up with a consensus and changes and any things that have to be considered. The use and allocation of AX, VI and VK prefix special event call signs, and this comes out of the debacle that happened a little while ago around the death of the Queen. What we're actually suggesting here is that the ACMA actually has the power to allocate within the ACMA. They don't have to go anywhere else. They don't have to change legislation. They don't have to change regulation. This actually is able to be done administratively within the ACMA. So that's just a change on the use of special event call signs and specifically the AX, VI and VK prefixes. Now, the amateur operating procedures. The ACMA in its consultation outlined that they want amateur operating procedures to be managed by the amateur community. So to prevent confusion as to what the correct examinable operating procedures are, we are recommending that the ACMA maintains stewardship of the operating standards procedure in support of the practical examination, and further the ACMA undertakes to release the operating standards under a Creative Commons by attribution license. So yeah, certainly significant input from the amateur community, but the stewardship of those procedures is maintained by the ACMA so that it can then be reflected back into the syllabus, etc. Now, short-term visitor arrangements for overseas amateurs. We support it moving it from 90 to a year to 365 days for short-term. For longer term, recognition of overseas amateur qualifications. The longer term, this has been a real area of problems and concerns. And hello to Chris Webb and also VK3FAR from Eildon in Victoria. Hello. This has been... there is a lot of work sitting behind this by a lot of people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a lot of work, but this is about removing the recognised prior learning technical oral examination requirements to access an equivalent Australian AOCP licence and qualification for the overseas amateurs who obtain their qualification by sitting the examinations. So this is about formally making a recognition of overseas licenses into the relevant AOCP level, and then formally declaring the reciprocal license arrangements and only requiring effectively the overseas amateur to then sit a regulations exam, and if you think about it, the technical side of it will be very similar between countries, but the regulations side of it may vary, and so we get them to do the regulations exam and the reciprocal license arrangements kick in as well. So this will simplify things greatly. Now, that's all for tonight. because I'm going to do the high power bits and pieces next week, because I think the class license consultation and our response to that consultation sits in its own part one of the response, and the high power sits in the part two. So we'll do the high power next week. So if there's any questions from anyone who's watching online, and we've got quite a few people watching online, I think there's about 25 at this point in time. So if there are any questions, I will attempt to answer them and go to the relevant section. So please drop them into the chat, or if you're on the repeater, please drop them into the repeater. So what I thought I would do to finish up is the latest and greatest amateur radio magazine, which I'll put under the wide. Okay, and surprise, there is a class license ready or not article in here as well, and there's also a Heath Robinson drawing on how the ACMA is going to convert the apparatus license over here to the class license down here. So and of course you can see that it's an incredibly simple process. So we should have it, at least tomorrow, or at least maybe the next day, or at least after Christmas. And Kevin Oz, I came from Germany 10 years ago. I'm still confused if I could lose my recognised licence under CEPT and HARIC. Right, Kevin, have I got a deal for you? So, what we actually did, and I'll just change to here, because what we actually did here, there is a specific, just let me go back a bit here, bear with me, because there is a specific, here we go. So, what we've actually recommended, Kevin, is that Australian non-assigned amateur service licences before the change to the ACMA policy in November 19th of September 2020. So you would be in that because you're from Germany 10 years ago. Be provided with suitable written certification of their rights to hold an Australian amateur call sign. So if you had you had your license recognised under CEPT and HARIC, which is exactly what we're talking about here, and so you would actually be provided written evidence to say that you had that recognised licence and that your licence is now whatever your call sign is, etc., under CEPT, etc. So that covers that particular scenario, Kevin, because that. Right at the moment, the way that the class license is drafted, that recognition is not in there, along with the recognition of the grandfathered licenses, which I think is the slide before that. And so I think it's the slide before that. Yeah, holding Australian amateur licenses holding grandfathered qualifications. So it's both this that we want included, and it's also the overseas qualifications that we want included as well. So I hope that answers your question, Kevin. That's specifically, we want that included in the class license. So hope that answers your question. Cool, not a problem. Amateur Radio Magazine. Now, this one, lots of very interesting articles in here. I'll go to the editorial, etc. There is and Roger Harrison, who is an ex-ionospheric prediction service person, article about solar cycle 25 rising faster and peaking sooner, which is great news for us. Now, if you're thinking about becoming a director of the WIA, this is the call for nominations and where to get your nomination form, etc., etc. So you can jump in there. Confounded by coils. Now, Dale Hughes, VK1DSH, who is part of the Spectrum Strategy Committee, and also our WRC and our ITU representative. He's actually on quite a number and chairs a couple of technical committees for the ITU. Review of single layer solenoid inductance calculations. So I have no doubt this is an incredibly well considered article by Dale. Now, again from Dale, on conductor skin depth and the lyricality of Litz wire. Lyricality, I'll have to look that word up. So he's talking about as things go up in frequency, you get skin effect on wire where the current is actually flowing on the outside of the conductor, and there's all sorts of interesting phenomenon that goes on around this. You can see here's a coil that's actually wound with Litz wire, and Litz wire is wire that has really fine filaments on it, all put together into a larger higher current carrying capacity wire, commonly used actually in multimeter leads and patch leads because it doesn't break as much because it's lots of little fine filaments.
And IF transformers in early valve radios.
There you go. IF transformers in early valve radios. Thank you, Peter. Again, Dale. I think this is Dale's show. A multi-mode transmitter for the 2200 meter band with Class E finals. So, if you want to get onto the 2200 meter band, the LF band, and in fact. That looks suspiciously like the coil and the photo from the last one. So I think Dale's been cross-pollinating his ideas. Now, part 4 of the antenna modelling using 4NEC 2. This is the continuation of that particular article about using the antenna modelling software, and this is a fairly substantial article. Now, Roger Harrison, class license arrives, ready or not, and we've even got a Lost in Space versus the Daleks. I am not an apparatus. I am not an apparatus. The Dalek is writing on the on the blackboard. The contest calendar. So Trent's VK4SN's contest calendar for 2023. So you're not going to miss a contest. What constitutes a contest article? Interesting. Contesters checklist. So lots about contesting. The 2023 John Moyle Memorial National Field Day rules. Now, John Moyle Memorial Field Day. The 18th to the 19th of March 2023, and the Ross Hull also. The Ross Hull is all of January, so don't forget the Ross Hull VHF UHF contest. Our normal articles. Oh, and there we go. The Ross Hull. There we go. The Ross Hull Memorial VHF UHF Marathon 2023 rules. Dave Minchin. All about what we heard about at the conference with the 122 and 134 gig transmitter, and that's a follow-up article. A short boom Yagi for FT8 on the 6 meter band by Greg, VK4GRM, and the modelling, etc. And I think that might be it. I think we're getting to the end of the article. Newcomer's Notebook, of course, for our foundation license by Jules Perrin, VK3 IFP. Inductors, resonant circuits, so inductors, capacitors, and putting them together into resonant circuits and the use of them, all about Q and the resonant frequency. and then over to you. So that's the last edition for 2022 of Amateur Radio Magazine, class license ready or not, from our publications committee in the WIA. So well worth it, and a fantastic. And if you're a member, you get this a lot cheaper than if you have to pay $14.50 at the newsagent. So worth becoming a member just for the magazine. And there's a bit of gratuitous advertising from Icon on the back. So anyway, that's our show for tonight. This is VK7 OTC, the club station of the Radio and Electronics Association of Southern Tasmania, with our DATV Experimenters Night. And next week will be our Christmas edition, the last one before Christmas. We run all through the Christmas break on a Wednesday night. We'll go into the high power part of this, which is probably a lot of interest, and also we might, if we get time, we might go into some of the ground plane, the 160 metre short vertical ground plane experiments that I've been doing up here at the Domain, using the wonderful big 120 radial ground plane that's up here. So we might go into that if we get a bit of time next week. So anyway, this is VK7 OTC. We'll catch you next week, and season's greetings to all, and thanks for those who contributed. And if you've got any other questions or anything, please shoot it through, and we'll attempt to answer them next week. So 73, have a great week, and yeah, it's 11 days till Christmas, so it's not that far away. 73 people.